episode. I believe this is technically 7 or 8, but we've missed a couple of weeks. But nonetheless, welcome to episode 8 or 7 of the ABCs of CFB. We got the whole team here this week, which is great. Myself, Alec Pappas, and my co-host here, Chris Porritt and Bryant Kraft. Gentlemen, it's good to see your faces. It's been, like 3 weeks since we've been able to do something like this. So excited to be talking to you. And it is Michigan State week. Chris, how are things?
Oh, well, trying to keep the line in the cage until, Saturday at about 7, maybe 7:30 p.m. But it's been tough. Honestly, I will say the last this past weekend of college football was really kind of enjoyable, not to have any stress between Michigan State, just kind of sit back, watch Ohio State play Iowa. I didn't get a chance to watch the Penn State game much, but I watched tons of games, throughout the day. So yeah, eager to jump in and discuss other games, discuss Michigan State, and then the other ones that are on the slate.
Yeah, for sure. Bryant, how are things?
Yeah, no, it's been too long. I'm glad we got the crew back together here. Similar to CP, trying to keep the lion in the cage. I'm experiencing the roller coasters of where on Tuesday I was feeling an upset's brewing. On Wednesday I'm feeling we're gonna get blown out, and today, I don't know what to think. So yeah, excited to jump into it. I'm excited to build up to the game. I think it's one of the best rivalries in college football. So it's going to be a good game. It's going to be fun. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this episode for everybody, we're not going to be as specific to the entire landscape of college football and talking about last week. We'll go into certainly talking about our picks for the weekend, but we're going to use this episode really to dive into Michigan State. We can spend just a couple minutes, gents, on we can take this holistically, but maybe also tie in the Big Ten. Any standing themes from your end on who you guys are seeing standing out across the country, things that are kind of surprising you a little bit since the last time we were all together, or you can even be specific to like the Big Ten? I'll quickly just say Ohio State's good, Georgia's good, Alabama's pretty good, and everybody else I do agree is like a little bit below them, although there is some kink in the armor with Alabama. But Bryant, is there any kind of holistic themes that you're seeing that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, no, with Michigan State sort of out of the running both in the conference and nationally, obviously, I've just been following the player more and more. I think it's starting to become more clear. And in the big nets, it's Michigan or Ohio State. I think the winner of that game is gonna go to the playoff. I think it's gonna have a hard time getting in. The SEC, it's gonna be Georgia. There's a path for Tennessee or Alabama to get in there as well. But I think the biggest surprise comes out of the Big 12 with TCU. Undefeated up to this point, had a big comeback last week. Likely favorites for remaining games. I know they have to go at Texas, but I don't know what Texas will look like in a few weeks. So TCU could run the table. And then in the Pac-12, I've been really surprised with Oregon's rebound. I watched a good part of the game, and they just got demolished. They looked like a JV team, and they've really turned it around and have had more or less dominating victories ever since. So they got a big one coming up with Utah, but surprised by them. I think the Pac-12 has a shot again, USC and maybe UCLA to sneak into the playoffs. So it'll be interesting.
Nice. CP, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll keep mine pretty brief. I definitely agree with Brian. I thought Oregon, that was on my internal pick sheet for last week was Oregon covering that game, and I thought they looked even better than I thought they might. I think UCLA actually looked really good too. They just weren't converting. They weren't scoring touchdowns. They were kicking a lot of field goals. I read that I don't think UCLA punted one time in that game. It was just a lot of field goals. And then kind of my other thought was that Ohio State, very, very good. But we saw some cracks with, they didn't look amazing, but they came off of
not according to Bryant.
I think they showed some, maybe not like cracks in the foundation, but some temporary cracks for sure. And then I think with the Big Ten West in general, it's just a total crapshoot. I frankly think that Illinois right now looks the best and probably has the the most likely chance to come out of the West. But in my opinion, right now, I think Wisconsin might be the best team in the Big Ten West, or maybe not right at this moment, but I think by the end of the year, we'll look back and say, Wisconsin, if they hadn't lost some of those early games, they would likely be in the Big Ten championship. But I mean, we'll see how that plays out. A lot could change. It's week to week, you never know what's going to happen. So.
Yeah, no, good takeaway there, especially with the Big Ten West. I agree with you. Like, we have no idea who. I was actually laughing because I didn't realize this, but technically Nebraska is a game out of first right now, which is like kind of just insane. Speaking of Nebraska,
there's still a path for Northwestern to win it as well. Everyone's in
it. Everyone's in it. Well, that's that good takeaways there. And now let's go ahead and focus though what we said this episode was going to be about. Obviously, for the people that have been listening since the beginning of this podcast, you'll know that Brian and Chris are staunch supporters of MSU. I'm a fan of U of M. And with this being rivalry week, we're going to go and dive into kind of what we're seeing with this matchup. So before we even go into the matchup specifically, I'd love you guys. We did this kind of independently with each one of you, but it's been a couple of weeks since then. Where do you see both Michigan State and U of M as a program right now and moving forward? Because mine's actually shifted since we talked about this like 2 and 3 weeks ago. So, Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts initially just on MSU as a program and U of M as a program.
Yeah, I'll start with Michigan because I think it's a little bit more clear where Michigan is right now, and I view Michigan as an extremely good, solid program at this moment. I mean, I think you kind of mentioned this previously, but I think Michigan does look kind of like, at one point Michigan State under D'Antonio when they had it rolling. They had the culture established. They were every year they were kind of getting, even if the classes were smaller, there was honestly just they were getting the players that they need in their system to execute well. Tough O linemen, good, strong, powerful running backs, receivers, frankly, that are good but not really elite. I think there's a big gap between. Well, there's a massive gap between Ohio State and the rest of college football when it comes to receivers in general. But I think that's one thing that maybe will hold Michigan back when it comes to like college football playoff games is like receiver. But honestly, I think they look great. I think Michigan's D line is reloading. Linebacker, I think they're okay right now, but I think there's some injuries to Michigan's linebacker core. And then same thing with DBs. It seems like they're recycling guys, and or I should say they're bringing in guys every year that are ready to go, have been in the program for 2, 3, 4 years. So Michigan to me is an established top 10 strong program at the moment. I think there's little doubt about that. I mean, you could say maybe they're top 5 or maybe they're top 12 or whatever it might be, but I think they're firmly in the top 10ish. And then with Michigan State, I think it's a little bit more murky at this point. I think that, frankly, I am not pessimistic at all because of the first few games of this year. I mean, I never looked at this as like you got to be winning by year 3, especially with considering COVID. With the injuries that happened this year, I think MSU really needed to come into this year and have really kind of like last year where they had almost no injuries until after the Michigan game is when last year Michigan State's injuries hit. And if they had injuries crop up this year, it was going to be tougher. And instead of some cropping up, it's been an avalanche of injuries from the first game. And Michigan State's not in a position where they can recuperate after that and still be a really good team or a good team even. So I think it's still a process, and I think you have to trust the process. I wouldn't even be thinking about making a change at head coach until at least 2 years from now. I mean, maybe if we're in this position 2 years from now, then I'd be like, okay, what's happening? Like, gotta really think about this. But right now, it's to me, it's all systems go, and you got to trust the process and keep building. There was a really good reference somebody mentioned earlier, and I'm not even going to try to bring it up here, but it's basically just that you got to give it at least 4 or 5 years to marinate, get the guys in the program, and then build your culture as well. So we're not there yet, but I think they're using the portal and some of the existing players as much as they can, and the injuries have just been kind of derailed the season, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. Bryant is he there? Yep, there he is.
Yeah. No, I think so. I'll do Michigan State first. I think CP and I are aligned. I think despite some rough games early on, I think the program, from a high level is right on track. We talked about it before, but it was a big task to overhaul the roster that Mel inherited, and then you add on COVID and the complications that made it. It's a steep climb. I think if you're going to compete at a high level, you need to have as close to as many, 85 scholarship players. You have to have a majority of those being Power 5 level players. And when Mel took over, we had maybe 20 to 25, maybe 30. So I think we're building that up every year. So getting more talent and more depth. And I would have envisioned more recruiting success at this point, I would say, just with Mel's reputation. But I think, every class that he's had so far has been better and better. And this year we're going to have some attrition that's already going on now. But I think it's still going to end up the best class we've had since 2016. So it's all positives there. And I think, Mel's recruiting approach isn't one like Antonio said. He's not going to settle for a guy unless he thinks can be an absolute Power 5 contributor. So I like where things are going. Obviously, you wish the injuries didn't happen this year, and you could see what would have happened earlier on with the games if we were close to full strength. But it was a big program win last week against Wisconsin. I think we're going to be as healthy as we've been all year coming into this weekend. So it'll be good to see how we can put that together. But then in terms of Michigan, I think Michigan's in a very solid, stable state. I think, you talked about it, Pep, is where Harb's, I think he went back to his roots on offense. You're talking about Sherrod Moore and Gaddis and Weiss. I don't think any of those guys do much with the offense. I think it's Harbaugh's offense, 99% of the way. And it's proven very successful and difficult to stop, and it's winning for them. And then on defense, I think, he's finally got the defensive system in place that he wants. So I think it's in a stable spot. I still think they're a ways away from a talent perspective, from like the top tiers, but they're building. I'll be interested to see. I feel like this year was the peak just in terms of their talent and the schedule. Everything played out really nicely this year, and it's going to be interesting to see going forward. This offseason they can lose a ton of players. And I think it's really going to be on, and next season's going to be on JJ. And can he become that quarterback that they want him to be, and hope that he can be and reach that ceiling? I don't think he's shown it yet, but I think a lot of that's going to hinge on him going forward.
Nice. Yeah, I have my only update from where I saw program level is Michigan State. I do agree with you, Brian. Like that was a program altering win this year for Michigan State, because you saw, I really don't understand some of the things that happen week to week in college football, because I thought Wisconsin was terrible and then they beat Purdue, and now it's like, hey, Michigan State got some players back. Maybe they're back to being like kind of okay, so now I see Michigan State on a similar path. It's still early. I'm certainly just trolling a little bit whenever I'm talking about Tucker. You got to give him at least 2 more years and see where you're at. Michigan, same exact thing. I don't have anything different to say other than what you guys have said. The only other question. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
And one thing I wanted to mention is kind of like what you mentioned with week to week. I mean, and year to year in college football is just so crazy. I mean, we saw it last year with Harbaugh. So this is the only thing I was going to say is the only thing that could change Michigan's status short term for me is if Harbaugh again is like, well, the Vikings or somebody is looking for a new head coach and Harbaugh wants to make a jump. But short term, I don't really see anything else derailing Michigan. Like coordinators, like Bryant said, with the offensive coordinator, it's Harbaugh's offense. Like it's always going to be Harbaugh's offense moving forward, I think. That's all I was going to say.
I think because he had said like he's done flirting with the NFL, like he'll be there. But if he did do that again, I would have to imagine that Ward Manuel would go, all right, we're gonna like move on amicably. And I very much believe this. I think that if they do an internal promotion, it'll either be Sharon Moore or it'll be Mike Hart. I think it's going to be one of those two guys.
Probably.
And if that happened, I would actually not mind that. because of the culture and how they have everything seemingly established right now, to be pretty successful. This will just be a very interesting year. Like if somehow Michigan can beat Ohio State at OSU, like that will kind of signify what a lot of these hot takes are about Michigan and Ohio State, which is when it comes to the core of that game, if you have a very solid defense and a smash mouth offense that can play complementary football, that can beat the style that Ryan Day plays, and I don't right now I would be naive to actually predict Michigan to win that game, but it would certainly set up for some interesting conversations in the offseason. We don't need to talk about one of the things we had originally put in our agenda today was talking about program changes. I think it's a little too early to talk about that, but we can save that for maybe the end of the year talk. One thing I would love to get your guys' thoughts on are you can do it if you want for Michigan as well, but one recruit that either MSU is in on or is committed to MSU that you are putting your stamp of that person is going to be incredible, or so predicting a bright future. So if you guys want to take that first, and then we can talk about the actual matchup itself. Chris, you wanna start us off?
Yeah. And it hurts because MSU just, as of today, has had a couple decommitments. But honestly, I think that is also part of kind of like the SEC mentality that Mel Tucker brought to the program, is that if you're going to recruit a bunch of guys that you think are really good, then you should expect other teams to look at them and say, I think that guy's really good. Let's keep him in Texas, or let's keep him in the South, or whatever that might be. And I think Clay Wedden, immediately going to Auburn. Kedrick Riscano, it looks like he's looking at, Texas A&M, looking at, Ole Miss, a couple other schools, Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
But no, honestly, I think there's a few guys currently in this class. I think Cole Dellinger, Clarkson guy, your guys' boy.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be really solid. I think he'll end up playing either center or guard, and I think he's going to be a good player. Just really quickly looking up commitment list. No, I like Cole Dellinger a lot. He's a little bit undersized, so I think he has to play either guard or center. One guy actually I think that is going to be really good. Another Detroit kid is Jalen Thompson. I think he's kind of your classic, either stand-up linebacker like a David Ojabo type, or more of a strong side defensive end where he's going to put on weight to get up to like 265 and just hold down the strong side defensive end position. But I mean, if there's one guy that I really think is going to be a top-notch, future first or second team All Big Ten player, to me, that's Jordan Hall, the linebacker out of IMG in Florida. I mean, watch film on him. Look at pictures of him, for God's sakes. I mean, he's the type of guy that walks off the bus first, but I think he's going to be a really good player. But I'll pass over to Bryant for his thoughts on the class.
Yeah, no, so I missed some of that. Sorry, I had a visitor join me here, but I had two recruits. So the first was Bay Jobe. I think he is the type of elite level talent that can change games. I mean, you've seen it with Michigan, with Hutchinson, Ojabo, some of the ends that they have. Like if you have an elite talent at defensive end that can get after the quarterback, that can change games and win games for you. And I think he's that type of talent. And then my second guy was Jordan Hall. I think, you said SCP. He's the prototypical. He's like, I compare him to like a Ray Lewis type of linebacker. He's big, he's strong, he's physical. He can play, run, pass. But I think the most important thing on him is we talked about it. I mean, you go back to 2020 at IMG. Jordan Hall's a sophomore. It's his first year at IMG. JJ McCarthy's a senior, his first year at IMG. Jordan Hall is voted captain over JJ of that team. So I think that tells you it all. He's a 3-year captain at the best football, school in the country. So I think that tells you all you need to know. Yeah. And then in terms of Michigan class, I mean, we troll each other all the time, but there's not a lot of guys that I like in Michigan. Yeah. They haven't won a lot of battles against, traditionally powerhouse programs in the recruiting trail this year. It's just been odd. I do like the defensive ends profiles that you guys have. So the Achebe and Pong and Kumba, the dude from France. I mean, both those guys are intriguing. I think they sort of fit the pipeline of the profile for the ends that you guys have been successful with in the past. But I also think those guys are less developed than the other recruits. You know, neither had played much football in high school. I do like Samaj Morgan from West Bloomfield. I think he's a high school player, but I don't know if he's going to translate to college or not. He's small. He's not super fast, but I like the way he plays and his mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I forgot to include any Michigan players, so I'll just mention one. And this guy, when I look at him, it looks like he should be playing for Wisconsin. Just his name to me. And his name's Brooks Barr. Bahr is his last name. Listed at like 6'6", 250. I mean, that guy reminds me of the DNs that Wisconsin had in 2011 when Michigan State played in the Big Ten championship game against those guys. And I love his size and great name. So I like that.
Yeah, great name. I don't have anybody for MSU just because I'm not as in the in the know of each one of those guys. But my Michigan one, I think this guy will eventually develop to be the next level Mike Morris. That's Inau Etta. I think he's going to be pretty good. Don't mean to run salt in the wound there. But then the other person is the guy from France. And the only reason I think so is because his measurables and athletic profile and shuttle times for what he's an edge guy is pretty crazy. He's 6'4", 230, has a 7'2" wingspan. So as an edge guy, they're taught to try to go with one hand into the chest of the offensive lineman. That's just crazy. So needless to say, I think he's going to be pretty good. Those would be my two, but I do agree with Brian. There's a lot to be desired with the Michigan class. But if they get Nicholas Harbor, then who knows what is going to happen there. All right, I know
you agreed with Brian about By Joe, right? The Oklahoma defensive end.
Oh yeah. He'll be good.
We've talked about a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason he wouldn't be good is if somehow he didn't, had off the field issues or something like that.
He's still a project though. He's skinny. He hasn't played a ton of football. Yeah. I mean, he's not going to be a freshman impact player. I don't think he's going to take a year or two to get up to speed, but.
I think I said he looked exactly like how Josh Uche looked at Michigan coming out of high school, but just bigger. If you look at I actually did one time look at their high school film together, it literally looks nearly identical. It's crazy, but so that would be pretty ideal. So let's I know we got a little bit of a time crunch here. But we're going to make sure we get all the analysis. Let's talk about this matchup, biggest matchup for us for the weekend, for the year, if you will. And let's do this where I'll transition to Brian and Chris to talk about MSU, where they see the overall matchup. But then just to make this easier, if you want to talk about one end or the other, you can interject. But Chris, why don't you take when Michigan State is on offense, you think they need to do this? And Bryant, you take when Michigan State is on defense, they need to do that. And then overall thoughts of the matchup. So Chris, why don't you start us off and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Honestly, offensively, I think there's gonna be quite a few I think it's gonna be tough sledding. I think there's gonna be quite a few possessions where it's 3 and out, or they get maybe a quick first down and then go 3 and out on the next set of downs. But I think you have to try to stay balanced in this game. This is not a type of game where you come out and have Thorne throw it 45 times, something like that. I think it's okay if initially they start off with, kind of a, 5 wide passing attack to loosen up Michigan's defense a little bit and drop the safeties a little bit, get the linebackers playing a little bit further off the line of scrimmage. But I think you have to establish the run at some point. And I think they do have a couple of competent backs. I was very negative about MSU's running back situation the first few weeks of the season, but I've gotten to the point where I do like Berger, and I've always liked Collins quite a bit. I think Collins, he takes 2-yard runs and gets 5 or 6 yards out of it usually. And Berger, he has the typical, prototypical running back size, and he's starting to look a lot better, especially against Wisconsin. So I think you have to try to pound those guys a little bit, get the O-line, moving around, and frankly, using some of those running plays where they slide the O-line either to the right or down block to the left, and then you have the running back either have a hole or a cutback lane to go around the other side of the O-line. And I think this is a game where you have to use the tight ends a ton. Not necessarily in like the blocking scheme for the running game, because none of them are very good blockers. But I mean, Malik Carr, as we've seen, only a few times, he is a complete mismatch against virtually any linebacker on any team that isn't named, Georgia. So I think you got to use the tight ends more in the passing game. Don't try to, go double tight ends and run the ball with those guys, because they're not going to add much to the blocking scheme, and you're just going to bring the linebackers and the safeties closer to the line of scrimmage. But then I think, it'll be somewhat similar to the 2020 game plan, where MSU is going to take some shots, and it's going to be to Jaden Reed. It's going to be back shoulder throws to Jaden Reed. And then there's going to be, like, if MSU, say the first possession, they get 1st and 10 at like the Michigan 40-ish yard line, I think you take a shot to Keon Coleman or Jaden Reed and try to see if you can get some big plays early, because you need them. I mean, Michigan's going to get big plays in the passing game. They're probably going to have a few long plays running the ball too. So I think MSU really just needs to come out and be balanced. But I think you skew like 60-40 towards the pass, and give those guys a chance to catch some jump balls and use the tight ends. So that's kind of my quick synopsis.
Okay, Bryant, defense.
Yeah, I guess just quickly on the offense, I had the same thing, CP. My note there was they need to fabricate a running game. New designs. I think, it's been rumored that Thorne hasn't been 100% healthy, but maybe is now with the bye week. So I think you get him involved in the running game. I think you get Reed, Coleman involved in the running game with some jet sweeps and reverses. I think you have to fabricate a running game. There's a stat out there with under Mel, we've lost like one game where we've rushed for over 100 yards. So it's not a big hurdle, but I don't think you can't line up 2 tight ends with Berger and run it right at Michigan to get that done. I think you need to have some creativity there. On defense, I think it's going to be all about preventing the big plays. If you can prevent the big runs and make JJ beat you, that's going to be our formula. I don't think JJ has shown yet that he can make those plays and win games. It's the game plans with him at quarterback have been very conservative. He hasn't thrown the ball down the field much. When he hasn't been accurate. And if you make him scramble around in the pocket, I mean, he shows he's loose with the ball with all the fumbles and interceptions. So I think we're going to have to load the box, more of a 4-3 scheme like we did last week with Wisconsin. Try to prevent the big plays with Corum and Edwards and make JJ beat you.
Okay. I'll take the Michigan end. You guys are hitting on something, like the one thing I absolutely agree with you on, Chris, is for Michigan State to win this game, they are going to need to target Malik Carr a lot, because I know this is going to be a little shocking, but I actually feel pretty confident in our defensive secondary to match up at least relatively decent with Reed and Coleman. I mean, Jamon Green is playing like better than I've ever seen him. Now, the thing is, they are still handsy. Like Michigan's cornerbacks grab a lot. So if they get that call, like they have, it happened in the past, happened in 2020, right? Vincent Gray got called for, I think, like 6 pass interference calls in a game. And but I think they're going to try to keep them somewhat on an island, and make it so eventually MSU becomes one-dimensional. But for Michigan as a whole, on offense, I think this is the game that they are going to try to open JJ up a little bit in the sense of throwing it. I think that there's going to be opportunities for that to take place. So I think that this will be a game that you'll see, which Bryant will be very shocked to see. You're going to see a lot of JJ running the ball too. I think he's going to do a lot of keepers, and that can open up potentially some fumble opportunities, right? But I think that the coaching staff sees that as an opportunity for them. So I think that's going to be the initial game plan, because I believe Michigan State is going to do everything that they can to load the box and stop the run. And then on the flip side, for defense for Michigan, I see them really, like I said, I think they're going to probably submit or get some pressure on Thorne right away. I think they're going to bring a lot of new disguised blitzes because I'm not a huge fan of Michigan State's offensive line. I think that they're okay, but more than likely, I'd say that they'd be a little bit below average. And the one thing that Jesse Minter has brought to this defense is much more complex blitzes that they haven't even had to utilize all that much this year. So my expectation is that they are going to bring a bit of pressure right off the front. So we'll see if Michigan State can. I think they're going to do similar to what you said. I think they're going to try to make Peyton Thorne win the game for them. So we'll see if that ends up taking place. Now let's. Oh, go ahead.
Just wanted to quickly jump in there real quick. And honestly, I don't think. I think you're right. First of all, I think that this will be the game where they're like, okay, MSU secondary isn't very good. Like, we can just tear them apart. And if MSU is surprised by that, that's a massive problem, because this is exactly what happened last year. If you look at the stats from last year, Cade McNamara, everybody going into that game was like, well, Michigan doesn't really even throw the ball. Cade was averaging maybe even less passing yards than JJ is right now. He was maybe averaging like 160 passing yards or something a game. And Michigan came out and they were like, well, clearly the weakness of Michigan State's defense is not running the ball, it's passing the ball. And they were passing it, 44 times? I think Cade set a record for, his career in terms of passes attempted. What am I trying to say?
Yeah.
So honestly, I think MSU comes out in a 4-3, but I think that 4-3 might as well be a 4-2-5 if the third linebacker is Angelo Gross or something. So they're going to be really flexible in terms of playing the run and the pass, and they better be expecting the pass, because yes, Michigan, as they showed last year, will come out throwing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a different view on that. I had, if I was Harbaugh, I would want to stick with what's working. I think one of the only ways Michigan State's going to have a game is if we get some turnovers plays on defense. And I think the only way that we're going to do that is if you open it up with JJ for running and pass. So if I was Michigan, I would stick with what's working, stick with the run game, stick with the short, crossing routes, quick passes, and I think if they do that, like they have been this year, it's going to be really hard for Michigan State to win.
No, yeah, yes, I agree with you, and I bet that opening it up, they're going to run the ball a lot. I think what I think is probably the likelier scenario that I was talking about is I think they're going to run JJ more as a part of the offense. With Corum, they're going to certainly run Corum. I will be very disappointed though if they just run it down the throat of MSU, because that's where MSU's strength is. So Blake Corum, try to get him outside, use JJ on bluff runs. They do that a lot with the tight end pulling, and he's the lead blocker. So, and then it'll eventually, I think, open up the passing game. And if I know he hasn't played or he's played, but he hasn't been a huge factor. But if Roman Wilson with his speed gets matched up on one of MSU's safeties, and this isn't at all like a disrespect thing, I just think he's incredibly fast. He's a great receiver for us, and that would be a large mismatch for MSU, especially not only Xavier Henderson, because I think he's a little bit better as a run supporter, but you guys have like a freshman starting, whether it be Tatum or Snow, right? Or not Snow. Magnum starting.
I think if Michigan had you, AP, as a slot receiver, you would be a mismatch on safeties. Our safeties are horrible pass deep.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's transition to your picks of this game. I'll just quickly start us off. We've gone through a bit of the analysis of what we're looking for, right, and what we expect to see. I go back and forth a lot on this, guys, because Michigan State, I do agree with what the common theme is, that, hey, when you're in this game, you throw the records aside, because they're going to play very hard. And I don't see this going the way that 2019 went, right? Which Michigan State was just not only decimated by injuries, they just weren't talented in that game. And going into it, I was like, there's just no way that Michigan State's going to win. Now, I still think it's very unlikely for Michigan State to win, but they are much more talented than that 2019 team. But because it is at home, it is a night game. Michigan in the last 2 years has really gotten up for these night games at home. I am seeing this game playing out where it's going to be about 38-20 is what I'm going to say with a Michigan win. Chris, what are your thoughts? Or why don't we go to Bryant? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, you got to set the stage. Michigan State is clearly in a worse spot here. You know, we've had the injuries we talked about. We have little momentum. And Michigan is the opposite. You know, they little injuries, the full momentum. So this is Michigan's game to lose. But at the same time, you know, contrary to what some of the media wants to tell you, Michigan is very beatable. You know, they were very beatable against Maryland, Indiana, Iowa. You know, even the Penn State game that they're hanging their hats on, you guys were losing in the third quarter in that game. So I think there is an avenue for Michigan State to win, but a lot of things are going to have to go right. I have it as Michigan 31-21. I think the 24-point spread or whatever it is that's out there is way too high for a rivalry game like this. You know, obviously that's possible. I think if Michigan, gets out to an early lead, it could get ugly. But I see it being tighter than what some Michigan fans might want. So I've got Michigan 31, MSU 21.
Chris?
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying, I think the line is very fair based on how the seasons have played out to this point. I mean, I think we all kind of thought the spread would be somewhere in like the 22 to 25 point range, something in there. And I think that's fair. And I think this sets up really, really well for Michigan. You know, it's home game, revenge game, all the things working in your favor, playing against a team that's, handicapped with injuries and things like that. But at the same time, I would say this sets up about as well as it can for Michigan State with all things considered. Everything we've talked about with injuries, playing on the road, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to get into it again. But I think the one variable that is a little bit under talked about in general in college football is teams coming off of a bye week. And maybe I put too much emphasis on this. But last year, Michigan was coming off a bye and Michigan State was not. Reverse. Michigan State was coming off a bye and Michigan wasn't. I thought Michigan looked way sharper to start the game than Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State gave up on the first offensive possession a 93-yard third down play. Frankly, that should have gone for like barely a first down, like 8 yards or 10 yards. So I think that the variable there is like, do both teams start slow? Does Michigan start fast? MSU start slow? Does vice versa happen? So there's some variables here, but I think the spread is fair. At night, I think my prediction is Michigan. I'll say 34-21. I think it sets up pretty well for Michigan, but I think Michigan State is in about as good of shape as they could hope to be for this game. When you look at, if this was week 2, looking back at like week 2 and everything. I think this sets up as well as it can for MSU, which is still not ideal.
Yeah, and I've said this in our chat. I really do mean this. If somehow Michigan State does completely like stone the Michigan rush game like they did last year, that would be a huge kudos to MSU and and their talent that they have on the D line, because there really would not be any excuse for Michigan this year because they have a better offensive line, arguably. They got a better center, right? That's now in this game. I talked about Trevor Keegan didn't play in the MSU game last year, but he's now got a full season and a half since that point of starting. Zinner is a high-level draft pick potentially. So, like, there really isn't an excuse. So if this happens, then it's kind of like kudos to MSU. So, all right, we're all in agreement. I know we got our last picks here, and Bryant has to take off here in the next couple of minutes. So why don't, Bryant, you start us off for your picks for the weekend and your locks, and then whenever you have to drop off, just go ahead and drop off.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll start with my lock. I've got Okie State plus 1.5 at Kansas State. So Kansas State, they got beat up a bit last week, coming off a big letdown. They're up against TCU and lost it. Adrian Martinez got knocked out of that game. Sounds like he's not going to play. Vaughn, K-State's running back, was banged up. So I like Okie State to win that game. So that's my lock. I've got second one. I got USC minus 15.5 at Arizona. I think USC's, so they're coming off a bye right after their first of the year. I think they're going to come out hot and they're going to bury Arizona and beat them by 3+ scores. Third one, I got Tennessee minus 12.5 at home versus Kentucky. Kentucky's had an up and down year. Levis is not completely healthy. He sat out 2 games ago. And on the flip side, I feel like Tennessee has so much confidence and momentum as a program right now. Their offense is really hard to stop. And I like Tennessee to win big there. And then my last two, I'm going back to sort of my roots with some Big Ten under at Rutgers versus Minnesota under 40.5. Similar, Minnesota's beat up on O. Tanner Morgan didn't play last week. They have a freshman quarterback, so that's really bad. I think it's going to be a defensive battle with both teams having enough scoring there. And then my fifth one, Northwestern at Iowa under 37.5. So I will not be watching, unlike Sicko Chris. But I think both, Northwestern, again, freshman quarterback. Iowa, we all talked about their offensive struggles. They can't even score versus South Dakota. I don't think they'll have an easy time versus Northwestern. So I like under 37.5 there.
Yeah, that's actually kind of surprising. It's that high, 47.5.
37.
Oh, 37. Okay, yeah. I thought you said 47.
It almost set a record. It's close to setting a record for the lowest over/under. I think it's like 32 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa's putrid on offense. It's pretty terrible. Chris, what are yours for the weekend?
Yeah, I'll do it up. And I won't include a ton of analysis because, frankly, nobody wants to hear it anyways. So I'm going to start in the Pac-12, big Pac-12 guy. So I got burned with the Notre Dame spread against Stanford, thinking that Notre Dame was a good team when they're terrible. But honestly, I'm going to go back to the well because UCLA has a home game. I don't know if it's at UCLA or if it's at Stanford, but I think UCLA will really bounce back. And I mentioned that they didn't punt against Oregon. They just were kicking field goals. So I like UCLA minus 16.5 against Stanford.
Okay.
The next one is a Big Ten game that I'm much less confident in. I saw that Nebraska is, I believe, a 7.5 point underdog at home to Illinois. And this is one of those games where I'm kind of going out on a limb here because I think Illinois is coming off a bye week and, maybe they start slow. Illinois is not great offensively anyways. And Nebraska is a strong offense. So I definitely could see Illinois winning this game, but I could see, Nebraska maybe, scoring late to lose by 5 or 6 points or whatever that might look like.
Okay.
My next game is in the ACC. I believe it's tonight or tomorrow night. It's Virginia Tech is at North Carolina State. I was doing some research on this game. Virginia Tech is not a very good team, but they do have a solid defense for not being a very good team. They're, I think, 50th overall in total defense. And North Carolina State, coming off a bye, still does not have their starting quarterback. And North Carolina State is favored by 14. So I have Virginia Tech covering 14 points at North Carolina State.
Okay.
And then my lock of the week, I have one pick after this, but my lock of the week, and it's because West Virginia has a terrible, terrible defense, is TCU minus 7.5 at West Virginia. That's my lock. And then my final game, which I'm taking it down to, I think it's either Florida or like on the border of Florida and Georgia where they have this game. But I love. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I love Florida to cover. It's 22.5. Florida's coming off a tough home game. Didn't look very good against LSU, but I could see this being a big bounce back game for Florida. All they got to do is not lose by 3 touchdowns. So I have Florida in that game.
That is, I think it takes place in Jacksonville.
Oh, that's right. You're right.
Yeah, right. They call it the largest outdoor cocktail party, right?
Yeah, we need to go to that.
Yeah, I would love to. I've heard it's a pretty fun time. Okay, so I will go in mine, and I don't have much of analysis either. My first game is in Big Ten country. It's Ohio State versus Penn State. I am going a little bit against the grain here. I'm going over 61.5 in this game because in full transparency, I do agree a lot with Bryant that like Ohio State is the cream of the crop right now, and they do look really good. They especially looked, good in the second half against Iowa. Now, I think the thing though that we got to remind ourselves about Ohio State that they do more so than a Michigan, more so than a Michigan State, they pad stats late in the game. They do not care about pulling, because that's the one thing I've noticed about Michigan State, and Michigan certainly does this. If they were up by more than 20-ish points later, or 28 points, let's say, into the middle of the third quarter, they put all their backups in. CJ Stroud was in that Iowa game until the last minute, or until, the last couple of minutes of the game. So I do so I do think though that they will score 61.5. I see that in the neighborhood of this game being around like 40 to 24, something like that. So that's where I'm at with that. And then the next game I have is Syracuse -3.5 versus Notre Dame. They're playing Notre Dame at home. Syracuse had a tough game last week against Clemson, right? But I could also very easily see this go Notre Dame's way. I could see them pulling it out. But I'm going to just stick it with the Orangemen. Hopefully they can continue this tread that Notre Dame's on, because I love seeing their season go how it is. Next game, I'm agreeing with you, Chris. UF plus 22.5 against UGA. No further analysis needed there. Next game is Cal plus 17 versus Oregon. They're hosting Oregon. Oregon just came off of a big win. Cal's a very meh kind of stadium to play, sleepy stadium, where I think the energy might be a little bit low. Cal's got still a decent defense. So I could see this being a relatively closer game for a little while, to the point that I think they win, something in the neighborhood of 24-10 or something like that. My lock of the weekend, though, this week is going to be Arkansas, oddly enough, -3.5 against Auburn, just because Auburn is so bad. They're on the verge of firing their coach. And I think Arkansas still has some talent that travels well with their style of play. So those are my picks of the weekend.
Yeah. I actually love your Oregon pick. Just kind of playing off the same thing I mentioned with UCLA. You're going on the road. You just had a big, huge, massive home win where you looked really good. And honestly, I do think Cal has a solid defense. I watched the game against Notre Dame, and Cal, Justin Wilcox is a defensive-minded coach. They have at least an okay defense.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's going to be an exciting weekend. I'm really pumped to be able to watch this game. I'm sure we'll be texting throughout it. I'm actually going to be in Austin, Texas this weekend, visiting a couple of the old work colleagues that we haven't seen since the old Fort Myers days. So Carolyn and I are going to be headed that way, and excited about it. But we'll still be keeping everybody, giving everybody the picks that they want for the weekend. So hopefully these are some winners. But thank you everybody for listening. We apologize for the delay in getting these out, but all three of us being back this week led to us having a great conversation about Michigan and Michigan State. So, anything else that you want to talk about though, Chris, before we wrap up? Are you good?
No, yeah, I think we're good to go. I think it'll be, hopefully a good game, but we'll see what happens. So go green.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening again. This has been the ABCs of CFB, episode 7 or 8, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Go Blue.